Tonight at 10, Israeli forces kill a Palestinian teenager as clashes intensify in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem that raise concern of a wider escalation. Russia says its Air Force jets flew 15 sorties over Syria and vows to intensify the air campaign, and NATO denounced Russia for violating Turkish airspace. And the Prime Minister says the government is serious about shifting to solar energy for electricity generation. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army, discussed a number of military issues with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mashal al-Zibin. The King called on the General Headquarters of the Armed Forces, where he was welcomed by General Zibin, who is the King's military advisor, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal, the Royal Air Force Commander, and other senior officers. King Abdullah was reassured on the military readiness of the various army units, expressing his pride in their personnel and capabilities. His Majesty the King welcomed Chairman of the Russian Federation Council, Valentina Matviyenko, for a discussion of Jordanian-Russian ties and ways to promote economic ties and enhance two-way trade. The meeting at Al Husseiniya Palace also dealt with the prospects for closer cooperation between the two countries' legislative institutions. The King and Matviyenko spoke about the importance of a meeting with the joint Jordanian-Russian Higher Committee due to take place this month to discuss a number of key projects, particularly energy and transport ventures. Also up for discussion was the fight against extremism and terrorism, whereas the King stressed support for regional and international efforts to ward off the danger that threatens global peace and stability. Matviyenko referred to Jordan as an oasis of stability. She also spoke about Moscow's efforts to find a political solution in Syria and stressed a cooperative world effort in the war against Daesh, which is the first problem to the region and the world. State Minister for Media Affairs Mohammed Momeni said Israeli violations in the occupied West Bank and its barring of worshippers from entering Jerusalem's Haram al-Sharif holy compound is a stigma on the face of humanity. Momeni spoke at the opening ceremony of the second Jordan Festival for Arab Media on behalf of Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour. Israeli troops today shot and killed a 13-year-old Palestinian as fierce clashes triggered by the breaches at the Al-Aqsa Mosque spread across the West Bank. The child was the second Palestinian killed by the Israelis in the past 24 hours. Here's more.
This is a scene that has become a daily occurrence. Israeli troops fight stone-throwing Palestinians in the biblical city of Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank in what seems to be the beginning of a new Palestinian uprising. The clashes were touched off by ongoing assaults against Palestinians. Today, 13-year-old Palestinian Abdurrahman Abdullah was shot dead by soldiers near Bethlehem. The killing triggered violent clashes between Palestinians and Israeli troops that swept across Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Hebron, and other West Bank towns. The child was the second victim of Israeli fire in the past 24 hours. Palestinians held a funeral procession for an 18-year-old Palestinian killed yesterday in clashes with troops near Tulkarem. His family are in tears. There is no let-up in anti-occupation protests in the West Bank, as Israel has recently stepped up its assaults and imposed further restrictions on the movement of Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed firm action to stop the protests and announced new stiff measures against the Palestinians.
Among the measures is the speeding up of demolition of the homes of terrorists, broadening administrative detention of writers, the bolstering of forces in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and the expulsion of inciters from the confines of the Old City and Temple Mount.
Tensions have been inflamed by frequent clashes between Palestinian rock throwers and Israeli occupation forces at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Palestinians say they fear increasing visits by Jewish groups to Al-Aqsa compound are eroding Muslim religious control there. Rad Push for the news at 10.
Russia said it will continue intensifying its air campaign in Syria following a series of airstrikes against Daesh militants in the country. The United States and its NATO allies denounced Russia for violating Turkish airspace along the frontier with Syria. Ankara threatened to respond if provoked again. This report has more.
Russia's air campaign in Syria is going on despite opposition from world nations. The Defense Ministry said in Moscow the Russian Air Force had made 25 sorties in Syria in the past 24 hours and hit 9 Daesh targets. The ministry also released a video showing Russian jets taking off and landing at Hmeimim Air Base near the Syrian port town of Latakia. It said Su-34, Su-24M and Su-25 planes took part in the strikes in the past 24 hours, adding that Air Force planes had hit Daesh targets in the Homs and Idlib provinces. The United States said the current Russian military operation is way off track and doomed to fail. Defense Secretary Ash Carter told a news conference the U.S. is conferring with Turkey after Ankara said a Russian jet had violated its airspace.
Our approach is different. It is to pursue the defeat of ISIL and a political transition in Syria at the same time. Russia seems to believe that you can have one without the other, and that's simply not realistic. So theirs is not strategically well thought through and is doomed to fail in its current form.
French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said airstrikes in Syria should target other groups considered as terrorists. Fabius was clarifying a statement by President François Hollande that the Russian airstrikes must target only Daesh. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned Russia over its unacceptable violation of Turkish airspace. Stoltenberg met with Turkey's foreign minister in Brussels to discuss Russia's military actions in and around Syria.
Russia's actions are not contributing to the security and the stability of the region. I call on Russia to fully respect NATO airspace and to avoid escalating tensions with the alliance. I urge Russia to take the necessary steps to align its efforts with those of the international community in the fight against ISIL.
For his part, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov reaffirmed that Moscow is offering to cooperate with Washington over bombing campaigns in Syria. Lavrov told the news conference the Americans spoke about the need for additional direct contacts between the Russian and American militaries, so Russia is still waiting for answers. Meanwhile, Daesh militants continue the destruction of historic monuments in Syria. Syria's Antiquities chief said the militants blew up the Arch of Triumph, a major monument in 2,000-year-old Roman city of Palmyra. The extremist group had destroyed 2 ancient temples at the central Syrian site in recent months. Hiba Al-Atoum for the news at 10.
Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan urged the European Union to consider safe havens and no-fly zones in Syria as a way to resolve the bloc's migrant crisis. But Erdogan signaled a readiness to discuss Europe's calls for more camps in Turkey. He called on the EU to do more to train rebels, set up a protected zone inside northern Syria, and to enforce a no-fly zone to end bombings of civilians. The EU, which pledged at least €1 billion for Syrian refugees in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and other countries last month, is willing to give Ankara funds so they can apply for asylum in camps in Turkey. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared the heavily fortified green zone in central Baghdad open to all citizens. The move was part of a reform drive prompted by protests demanding greater transparency and openness. The 10-square-kilometer green zone on the bank of the Tigris River has been largely off limits to the Iraqi public due to security concerns since the 2003 U.S. invasion. Checkpoints and concrete barriers have for years blocked bridges and highways leading into the zone, which once housed the headquarters of the U.S. occupation and government buildings. Security officials said 2 entrances to the green zone had been opened and that Army Special Forces would handle the task of maintaining security. The airport in Yemen's southern port city of Aden is undergoing final renovations in preparation for opening to commercial flights for the first time in months. Iran-backed Houthi militias took control of the port city in March, forcing President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi into exile until last month, when his troops, backed by Saudi-led coalition forces, seized the city. The airport director said the facility will soon be ready to receive commercial flights. Aden suffered widespread damage and destruction throughout the ongoing civil war, and the airport itself was a main battle zone until Hadi's troops recaptured it in July. Back here at home, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said the government is serious about shifting to solar energy for electricity generation. He said His Majesty the King is spearheading the big change in the country, not only in terms of energy consumption patterns, but it's also production as well. The Prime Minister paid a surprise visit to the Jordan Electric Power Company for a meeting with its executives. Accompanied by the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources and the President of the Energy Regulatory Commission, Mansour urged the National Electricity Company to be prepared for the switch to solar energy and to facilitate procedures for both citizens and investors. The Prime Minister checked on the company's renewable energy department, which is receiving applications by citizens willing to use the system to generate power from solar energy. This year's Nobel Prize for Medicine went to 3 scientists from Japan, China and Ireland. They are credited for their discoveries that led to the development of potent new drugs against parasitic diseases, including malaria and elephantiasis. Irish-born William Campbell and Japan's Satoshi Omura won half of the prize for discovering ivermectin, a derivative of which has been used to treat hundreds of millions of people with river blindness and lymphatic filariasis. China's Toyoyo was awarded the other half of the prize for discovering artemisinin, a drug that has slashed malaria deaths and has become the mainstay of fighting the mosquito-borne disease. Some 3 billion people, most of them living in poor countries, are at risk of contracting the 3 parasitic diseases.
We believe that this was a paradigm shift in medicine, in the establishment of 2 separate entities to treat parasitic disorders that we've never been able to identify. It's in line with when we found the antibiotics sulfa or penicillin. We now have the tools to start an eradication program that we as of yet only have been able to establish for smallpox. Now we can add the hope of within a 10 to 15 years time eradicate both river blindness and elephantiasis, 2 devastating, disabling conditions that affect the population in a broad sense in the Americas, in sub-Saharan areas and also in South Asia.
Part of London's iconic Savile Row was filled with sheep and turned into a grazing meadow to help raise awareness of the British wool industry. The street was covered in turf and closed to traffic while the sheep grazed along it. The aim was to publicise the UK's National Wool Week, which is backed by the Prince of Wales and is now in its 6th year. Another message from the event was that woolen garments are sustainable and biodegradable as they can last for decades.
Guys, can you sort of push the sheet down a little bit for us?
We begin with tennis and the China Open. Andreas Heider-Marer of Austria cruised past 8th seed Jo Wilfried Tsonga of France 7-6, 6-2. The 64th ranked Heider-Marer saved a set point in the 9th game before breaking Tsonga's serve to level the set at 5-5 in the tie-break. Tsonga lost both his serves at 4-5 to give Heider-Marer the set. At 2-2 in the second set, Heider-Marer broke Tsonga's serve twice to serve out the match after 97 minutes of play.
Game, set and match. Heider-Marer.
And to the Tokyo Open, second seed and home favorite Kai Nishikori had to fight back from a set down against Croatian Borna Coric to reach the second round of the tournament. Coric started the match superbly, breaking Nishikori's serve twice to make a 3-love lead and went on to take the set 6-2. Nishikori broke the Croatian serve in the second game of the second set and again in the sixth game to win the set 6-1. Another break at the start of the third set, but the Japanese on his way to victory, taking the set 6-2 and the match in 2 hours, 9 minutes. Now a look at the weather forecast. Fair conditions will prevail in many regions tonight and moderate in the Jordan Valley, the Dead Sea and Aqaba, with a chance for light rain, especially in the country's south. Winds will be northwesterly to moderate. Tomorrow relatively hot are forecast for the Jordan Valley, Dead Sea and Wadi regions, while fair in the rest of the country. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a hot day Tuesday with northerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close our top stories once again. Israeli forces kill a Palestinian teenager as clashes intensify in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem that raise concern of a wider escalation. Russia says its Air Force jets flew 15 sorties over Syria and vows to intensify the air campaign, and NATO denounced Russia for violating Turkish airspace. And the Prime Minister says the government is serious about shifting to solar energy for electricity generation. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Lord Balker. Thank you for watching and have a good night.